welcome to the Christchurch Fox Chapel podcast. It's the fastest growing conservative, evangelical, charismatic Anglican podcast in the entire Fox Chapel area. Joined today by Ben.
Hello.
For a change.
It's good to have you back, Alex.
Thanks. I was a guest on the podcast last week.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, it felt a little bit empty without you hosting. So I'm glad to have you back in your normal seat. Well, you were sitting in the same seat, actually, but metaphorically speaking.
Thank you. I'm enjoying my metaphorical seat. We're in Judges 8.
Yes.
And you're preaching this week.
Yeah.
It's a difficult passage, isn't it? And there's a lot of background that I think probably we don't need to read, but you could take us through. Yeah.
So there's so much. This is the whole Gideon narrative, right? Goes from chapter 6 all the way through chapter 8. And in my Bible, at least, that's 4 full pages.
There've been a couple of moments in church where someone's done a reading and they've done like a face, or they've just looked relieved at the end of it, and there's almost been like a chuckle in the congregation.
Yeah, I felt compelled to like give props to them a couple times, because like it was real. There were so many hard names, and the passages, the stories are just really long.
They just are, and you can't just read a bit, because then you miss the detail. You even miss the basic plot. It's so stretched out.
I think in Gideon, I think that it's all about the detail. Right. It's all about the length, and it's all about the character development. The way that Gideon develops as a character is an example for us, and not a good one. I think it gives us insight into the human heart, and there's an error I think people always run into in the Old Testament, which is like taking these Old Testament characters and making them out just to be heroes. Like dare to be a Daniel, dare to be a David, and be like Samson, be strong like Samson, but they really are not. It's much more complicated than that.
It's way more complicated, isn't it?
And the point is for us to see something in ourselves as we read about these characters. So Gideon, you took us through. It's been a 3-part series, right?
Yeah, I looked at the wine press. So he's in the wine press threshing the wheat, and God appears to him, or the angel of the Lord appears to him, and speaks to him, and Gideon is sort of a little bit uncertain about really how much he can believe this. So he asks for a sign, and the angel makes him pour some soup on a rock and then sets it on fire. And then he says, "Alas, I've seen the angel of the Lord."
Oh, the British soup. I remember that.
The British soup.
Yeah, that's good. That was really fun.
And then, thanks. And it's classic burn soup. And then he does the fleece twice before the Lord as well. Where he lays down a fleece, and the ground is wet and the fleece is dry, and then vice versa. And then those signs. And then in battle, last week we looked at Jenna. Jenna looked at this passage where Gideon actually sneaks into the enemy camp and gets to hear a prophecy that the enemies had about Gideon's victory. So he's endlessly reassured by God.
And he's endlessly unbelieving. He's weak character. I think
it's remarkable.
What did Jenna call it? Weaknesses of character, weakness of
internal, external, right?
Internal weakness of character and external weakness of circumstance.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's great.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So the situations, like for instance, the fact he's surrounded by enemies, that's an external thing. There's the issue, the fact that he needs a fire angel to set his soup on fire and make fleeces wet and dry and sneak in to hear barley cake prophecies from the enemies and have his forces whittle down from 32,000 to 300 and still win, and needs all of these things.
And we made it we've kind of emphatically made the point that the whole 300 thing is not about recruiting the SAS or the Navy SEALs of his army. This is not. It's not. The text does not indicate anything that would make us think like, oh, these are the elite forces. That's not the point of the passage. The point of the passage is that God does what he wants to do with less.
Right. So there's a consistency of God revealing himself through weakness, which is another point Jenna made.
So
there's a funny scene in the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. And
who's that? Who did that one again?
Is it Tom Stoppard? I don't know. I can't remember. I'll have to look him up. I think it is. Anyway, we'll look it up. We'll get letters if I'm wrong. And I think one of them's like flipping a coin. Let's say it's heads and tails on a coin. And he's had all these headses in a row. And he said, well, I can't possibly get another head because I've had all these headses. And there's this, and there's all this, and he explores like the possibility of chance and all that kind of a thing. But there's always this sense, I think, in our minds that we've pushed our luck a little bit too much. God has answered this prayer and this prayer and this prayer, so I've kind of run out, and I probably shouldn't ask for any more because I've had my share, or I shouldn't ask for any more because I'll be disappointed, and God has consistently kind of helped me out so far, so therefore I'm done. That's the kind of very human understanding. I've had heads all the way. I don't want to flip the coin anymore. It'll be a tail. And that's a very human thought. Actually, a better way of looking at Scripture, and particularly the Gideon part of Scripture, is that God has consistently saved you and saved you and saved you and saved you. He's demonstrated his power through angels, through soup on fire, through fleeces that are wet, fleeces that are dried, through barley cake prophecies, through 32,000 men becoming 20,000 men, becoming 10,000, becoming 300 men, all this kind of stuff. Maybe God is actually sovereign. And God is consistent in his character and his nature.
Yeah. And by the way, it is Tom Stoppard.
Yes!
You're right on. Got it.
Thank you very much.
Or so saith Google. There's a 1990 film of it. But I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And also, in retrospect, I find this every time I do something good by the power of God, that I immediately insert myself and take credit for it and think, oh, aren't I awesome?
Yes.
And that is precisely what Gideon does in this next passage.
And to interrupt you, I know you're ready, but the little bit where he says, cry for a sword for God and for Gideon that we heard a couple of times.
Yeah, and for Gideon.
I just wondered, is that me and you, God?
Just
is it? Is it?
Yeah. To God be the glory, and to me, in just a little bit.
That's the plaque. That's the church plaque.
Oh, yeah.
Given to the glory of God, and ... insert blasphemy.
We will not be doing plaques for the building campaign.
Given to the glory of God, and also, by the way, let's get a 2 for me also. That's horrific. So I wondered if that sword for the Lord and for Gideon thing was just a little hint of what's to come in the story, which is firmly where we are now.
Well, he jumped into these incredible odds, and he has quite a clever battle plan, right? Okay. Given to him by the Lord, right? With the 300 people and the trumpet, they blow the trumpets, and then they drop the clay pots over top of the torches, and all the Midianites are thrown into confusion. And then Gideon,
party poppers, aren't they? It's just children's toys.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
Yeah. It's ludicrous. They're not Jenna made the point. They're not holding swords.
No.
There's a
sword for the Lord. Where?
What sword? Is this what a sword for the Lord looks like? And so they do this whole thing. They rout the Midianites, and so beginning of chapter 8, I'm just going to kind of give everybody a bit of a summary, because I've sort of our passage starts in verse 22 of chapter 8, but there's this whole giant section that, just because of the constraints of time, it really could preach a sermon on it, but we're not going to get there. But I think it's really relevant. So Gideon keeps pursuing folks, and then he had asked the people of Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim was kind of the sister or brother tribe of of Manasseh, which was Gideon's tribe. And the Ephraimites are ticked off at Gideon because all he asked them to do was like secure the fords of the Jordan or something like that. And they're like, why didn't you give me a bigger part in the battle? And Gideon like sweet talks them and basically says, oh, what I did was nothing. What you did, you captured these two Midianite princes.
Oreb and Zeb.
Yeah, Oreb and Zeb. Name your kids that. You did really great. So he proves to be a savvy political leader.
Okay.
And then he continues pursuing with his 300 men, the rest of the Midianites. There's 15,000 who are fleeing. 12,000 Midianites have fallen. 15,000 remain. He's pursuing them with 300, and they're exhausted. And he goes through these two towns,
right?
Who are in the tribe, in like the territory of the tribe of Dan. I need to look up where that is. These are Israelite towns. One is called Sukkoth, and the other is called Penuel. And at both of them, he goes up to the town, goes into the town and says, "Listen, we're exhausted. My men need bread and provisions. Will you take care of us?" And these guys, they understand that this is an Israelite chasing the Midianites, but they don't want to cast their lot in yet with Gideon, right? Because if you provided food to this guy and then he loses, the Midianites are all going to come back and kill you.
Yeah.
So they tell him that, and so he says to both places. He says to the first place, to the Sukkoth, that I'm going to come back and whip you with thorns of the wilderness and with briars.
Cool.
Once I get victory. And then in Penuel, he says, I'm going to come and I'll break down this tower that was in Penuel.
Right.
Doesn't Jesus say something about the Tower of Penuel?
Really?
No, it's different.
Okay.
Never mind.
Ooh.
No, that was the Tower of something.
Siloam? No.
Siloam. Yeah, that's it. And then Pilate mixed. Never mind. I'm mixing things up. But anyways, he basically pledges vengeance on them because he's not going to help them in the heat of the moment. So continues on. He's pursuing 15,000 Midianites and these two princes, Zeba and Zalmunna. Name your second two sons that. And he takes over them. He conquers them.
Right.
He and his 300 men somehow.
Yeah.
We're not given the details, but it's probably it's got to be miraculous.
He captures the kings.
And he then goes back to Sukkoth.
Oh yeah.
And he takes this young boy hostage and asks, like, who's in charge of this town of Sukkoth?
Right.
And so this guy gives them the names of all the elders, and then they round up all the elders and they get some thorns and briars from the wilderness and they humiliate them.
And with them, taught the men of Sukkoth a lesson.
They taught them, I'm going to tell them a lesson. Do you ever say that to your son? Like, I'm going to teach you a lesson.
I wouldn't like to comment on air. I'd certainly like to.
Yeah. But he does this. He's humiliating fellow Israelites. And then he goes to Penuel and knocks down the tower, just as he said he would, but he takes it a step further. He has his men kill every single man in Penuel.
Right. It's a bit much, isn't it?
This is the ban. Sometimes, there was a ban placed against the Canaanites to leave none of the males alive, right? Mm-hmm. But he's murdering his brothers. He's murdering his fellow. He's murdering the people of God. So what went wrong here? There's power. Sorry, I didn't even let you.
No, go ahead.
No, please.
I was thinking power.
Oh yeah, okay. The Panther's power. Sorry, that was awkward.
Is there power?
Jesus.
Is this just like youth group? It's power, isn't it?
It's found. So it's gone to his head, and he's just like, he's full of it now. He's acting savvy, and then Ziba and Zalmunna kind of taunt him, and you can tell that he wants to be, that Gideon wants to be a king here, because, and here's how we know, instead of immediately putting them to death himself, which is what any conqueror will do, he wants his son to do it. Why would he want his son to do it?
I see. So there's a dynasty.
Yeah, he wants his son's strength in battle to be shown, and for his son to be the person. He's setting up a dynasty, and his son is like a kid, and so he won't do it. And so Ziba and Zalmunna taunt him and say, "Rise yourself and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." Some great quotes in this. And so Gideon arose and killed them, and then took their crescent ornaments from the necks of their camels. And that gets us to our passage for this morning.
Wow. So Judges 8:22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son," and your grandson also, "for you've saved us in the hand of Midian." So there's already this kind of whiff of kingship coming about here now.
And where do you think they got that idea from?
Well, him. And so the judges were set up to lead and then die, and then some new judge will be appointed. This is starting to sound more like a kind of the people could inherit from the parents the leadership of the country.
Yeah,
that's a king, and that's a whole different book, and that's much later.
But at the end of the Judges, remember, there's this refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel.
Yeah,
everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So there's this. There's this desire and anticipation of a kingly rule.
Right.
And the question is, does Gideon have what it takes?
Right.
And the answer is clearly no.
No, and when we get into Kings, which we're not going to study at the moment, what God says through Samuel, the last judge, is that you don't want a king, really. If you get a king, what's going to happen is that the king is going to take all of your men, put them in the army. He's going to take all of your food to feed the army. He's going to take all of your daughters to cook the food. He's going to take the best land and the best cattle, and he's going to tax you to look after all of those things.
Yeah.
And then he's going to send you into battle to fight, and then you're going to die. So you don't want a king, really. And the people say, no, we do want a king, because all of the nations around us have a king. They basically have kind of monarch envy at the end of this book or at the start of the next one. And so this is too early in the story, in the phase of the Judges, which is a 300-ish year period before Kings.
Yeah.
You would rule as a judge, and then you'd be replaced by another one. So here's Gideon kind of thinking ahead. Now, God is wonderful, because although God says you should not have a king, they insist on having one, and he relents even though they shouldn't have one. The king ultimately ends up being an even greater precursor of Jesus than the judges. These flawed judges point to Jesus, so do the flawed kings. And ultimately, it is actually an offspring or descendant of David who will be Jesus.
Yeah.
So these are all wonderful things coming in the future. But Gideon is not in that phase. They haven't even had the should we have a king or not discussion. They're very firmly in the no, we should not phase. And here he is behaving in a somewhat kingly way.
Yeah.
And I think, as we'll see in a minute, and you'll lead us through it, also trying to make himself a bit of a priest as well, as we'll see. So he's really looking to become this omnicompetent, all-needed messianic figure.
Yeah. So he's basically everything but a king.
Mm-hmm.
And so verse 23, Gideon said, they all went under rule, and he says, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you."
Jolly good. Excellent. Well
Great.
said.
Yeah, well said. But does he really mean that?
I don't know. He says, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We'll willingly give them." And so there's this starting to sound a little bit like a tax. That's one way of looking at it. But it's also reminiscent, I think you were saying just before we started, a real back along in the story, just as they enter the wilderness. while Moses is getting the 10 Commandments and Aaron is down with the people. Yeah. They've got all this jewelry that they've managed to snaffle from Egypt to fund the expedition and the founding of a kingdom, the founding of a promised land.
Yeah.
And what do they do with the jewelry? They throw it into the fire, make a golden calf, and start to worship it.
Yeah. They burn it down, melt it down, and
cool.
Make an idol. But Gideon is not making. He's not going to make an idol. He's going to make something, right? Like he's going to make something else because he knows better than to make an idol. Clearly, he knows better than to make himself king. The Lord is your king.
The weight of the golden earrings they requested was 1,700 shekels, footnote number 1, of gold. A shekel was about 2/5 of an ounce. That's helpful. Or 11 grams. I don't know why they don't just say what the total weight is rather than the sort of unit amount. That's still not helpful. I can't picture that.
Yeah, come on, study Bible.
Yeah.
Wait, 1,700 shekels?
Equals 2/5 of an ounce or 11 grams. So you're going to use Google to figure out how big that would
times 1,700.
There must be. I can't believe someone hasn't done that study for us already.
18,000. So 18,700 grams. So 18 kilograms times 2 points. It's 40 pounds. 40 some pounds of gold.
It's about the international travel limit with American Airlines. Big suitcase.
Yeah. A suitcase of gold.
It's actually astonishingly close to the international travel limit. They're really careful not to have to pay the excess baggage.
Yeah.
Or you can upgrade actually by getting platinum status by having their credit card.
Oh, really?
So there's two ways of doing it.
Oh, yeah, that's the way to do it.
Anyway, evidently they're not platinum status AA. So they're flying internationally, is what we know. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants, this must be hand baggage, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of the camels. So there's actually a whole bunch of treasure.
I don't think you can do any of that on Southwest.
No, you certainly can't.
You're paying for each thing individually.
And Gideon made an ephod of it. Whoa.
What's an ephod?
Dun, 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 dun. This is a priestly garment worn around the chest.
It's like imagine a one of those weight vest things that people wear. Really intense army style people. Where they have like the weights on it and stuff.
To train.
Yeah, to train.
Yeah. Or like a stab vest that like police officer would wear or something.
Yeah. Except instead of weights, it has like precious stones and stuff
onyx
on it.
Yeah.
Special clothes.
Yeah. So this is an ornate ceremonial vest of some kind.
Yeah.
Breastplate worn by a priest.
Yeah.
That was signifying his office as a priest, but also was in some way used to inquire of the Lord, to seek prophetic words from the Lord.
And this is problematic.
Problematic
on a number of levels. Namely that God has already given very detailed instructions as to how he is supposed to be worshipped and how priestly duties are to happen.
And there already is an ephod.
There already is
the high
an
priest
ephod.
already has.
There's already a priestly clan, the Levites,
that use it.
And Gideon is not a Levite.
So this is a rival ephod.
He's making his own. He's making up his own sort of religion. He's separating out, but he's like, oh, I'm not making a calf. I tore down on the Baal things. So
he's not made a crown
calf.
for his own head. He's not made a calf to worship Baal, but he has made a priestly garment for himself to set himself up in a priestly role. So he's now essentially seeking to mediate the relationship that the people have with God himself. And he's seeking to speak prophetically for the Lord himself.
And look what happens, verse 27. Gideon made an ephod of it, and he put it in his city in Ophrah. Mm-hmm. I always think of Oprah when I read that.
Yeah, me too.
And all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So this became that word of whoring is.
Oh, I know this word. It's mokesh.
Mokesh.
Yeah, it's it's a hook in the nose or a noose, and I think we had that word earlier in the study. Snare came up earlier.
Wait, that's mokesh.
Baal would be a snare for you. Baal was described as a snare earlier in the book of Judges.
Oh, I got to do some word study.
Yeah. And the idols were described as snares.
Yeah, but the word that's translated here, hoard after it, that has to do with.
Oh yeah.
There's a connection between idolatry and sexuality. I think that's very. It's a very potent kind of metaphor going on.
To play the harlot.
So there's an idea of worship going on.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, so here now is something that has the appearance of Judaism, but in fact is not. He has the appearance of a priest. He is in fact not one. And I think you sometimes see this with. You see this with Saul, King Saul, later on in Scripture, where Samuel says that, wait here, basically, we'll have a battle. When I come back, I'll do a little sacrifice, and then we'll have a battle and we'll win. And Samuel
is a priest.
Yeah, Samuel is a priest and a judge. And he comes back and a bit late for Saul's liking. Saul has already appointed himself a priest and already done a sacrifice. And of course, this reveals a number of things, that Saul doesn't have the right to be a priest. He's rebuked for it. It shows his impatience. He doesn't trust God and God's timing. But I think it also shows that Saul has probably got a bit of a superstitious kind of a faith. And he thinks, well, I've got to do this sacrifice because then that will sort of imprecate God and make things work out. And he's turned what is a very holy thing into actually a superstition or a ceremony.
Yeah, we don't do that.
It's precisely what Christianity is all about. It's precisely what precipitated the Reformation. Was that our constant behaviours had become snares to us. We'd become superstitious. The people were illiterate. They didn't understand what was happening. Things weren't said in their own language. There was mysterious mumbo jumbo going on at the front. And people trusted the mumbo-jumbo instead of the Lord.
If I go and do the right things, if I worship in the right way and sing the right songs and take the right communion, then I'm in the right denomination.
Oh yeah.
Then that is how I attain righteousness with God. It's sort of as just doing. If I'm baptized, if I get the right ceremony.
Yeah, really holy things can become a snare to you because you end up trusting the thing instead of the Creator.
Yeah.
And that is actually what Romans 1 says.
Yeah.
Which we've often referred to in this series, this idolatry thing. That even actually the good things of God, churchy things, can become idols for us. Church success, church budget, whatever. They can all become, even the Bible can become an idol.
Yeah.
So here is Gideon doing something that has the appearance of godliness,
but denying its power.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it becomes a snare.
Yeah. Hook in the nose. That's what Satan always does, right? He shows you the bait and hides the hook, as Tim Keller says.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really well put.
All right. So Midian was subdued. Oh, no. Am I jumping ahead too much?
No, you're right there.
Okay, cool. So I'm in verse 28. Midian was subdued before the people of Israel. They raised their heads no more. The land had rest 40 years. And that's an important phrase that comes up a lot in Scripture.
Yeah.
The land is supposed to Sabbath also.
God did what he promised to do, even in spite of this guy.
Yeah.
But we get a few more details about Jerubbaal, or the one who contends against Baal, or aka Gideon. Verse 29. Jerubbaal, Gideon, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. We're going to hear about him in the next chapter. And Gideon's son Joash died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash's father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So he's a womanizer.
Yeah. Like Dr. Evil's father in Austin Powers.
It's my shame I'm not recognizing that. But.
Oh, you don't remember Dr. Evil's amazing soliloquy? My father would womanize. You know that? No? Oh, it's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. Shame on me.
Oh, yeah.
I'm pouring salt in my hair right now, metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, exactly. Like Dr. Evil's father. So Abimelech, therefore, is Dr. Evil. He's just like Solomon, not Edwards, like Solomon the king.
Solomon Edwards is wonderful.
Yeah.
Stand-up bloke.
Yeah, totally different. But like he's got all of these offspring, all these different wives. I just see this pattern of objectification. Maybe I'm reading and applying a modern category to something that's ancient.
Abimelech means my father is king.
No, it doesn't.
Whoa!
Oh yeah, Abi. Ab
Melech.
means father.
Father.
Melech is king. Oh my goodness.
Dun, 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 dun.
That's all right.
So ironically, this is ESV Study Bible. Ironically then, Gideon, who had vigorously proclaimed that he should not be king, see notes, nevertheless did function as a king, even to the point of giving his son such a name as my father is the king. So it's kind of funny, isn't it?
Dude, he's such a liar.
Wild. I love it. Okay.
And notice at the end of this, there's no mention of like, he's not like proclaiming the glories of Yahweh or anything like that. He's just kind of like settling into this savvy, smarmy old man who has a bunch of wives.
Not that savvy then, is he?
And like, you know, if a person who was truly of the Lord, I guess you could have could have had the beginning of a real dynasty of people, you know, of competent leaders and good things. But instead,
it's all gone to pot. He's made himself into a priest. He's made himself into a king. He's playing at king and playing at priest. He's twisting everything. It's all about himself. And as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals. So there's that pattern that we see in, of course they did. There's this pattern that we see. Every time the judge dies, the people kind of revert to this thing. They whored, which is a very strong word, as we've said, after the Baals. And they made Baal Berith their god. It's not a tea bread from Wales, for those of you listening there. It sounds very similar. Baal Berith, as opposed to whatever the Welsh one is.
I don't know what it is.
Barabrith. Baal Berith means Baal of the covenant.
Baal of the covenant.
So there's this idea of making a covenant with Baal, entering into a deep relationship with him, of reliance upon him, of provision and protection and unity, that they'd be identified with him, and that they would make sacrifices to him, and that he would rule over them.
With this non-God.
With a non-God with whom they have this social, sexual, economic dependency.
So it's almost like the idolatry is becoming solidified.
Stronger.
Yeah,
bigger.
And stronger and more deeply committed.
You do get the sense, don't you, as you read through this, that the Hebrew writer is just giving us this delightful little bit of subtle nod here and there, here and there, here and there about what's going on.
It's all full of subtle nods.
Yeah, the priest thing, the king thing, the covenant thing, the whoring thing. It's all there. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. So there's that Deuteronomy 6 thing. Don't forget, God says. And they've forgotten.
Yeah, they forgot.
And they did not show steadfast love. And that is what God shows, isn't it? I'm imagining it's chesed. It's the steadfast love of God. So they didn't show the kind of steadfast love that God has.
Remembering is such a key word throughout the scriptures. Just to remember.
Yeah. And it means more than to call to mind, I think.
Yeah, it's almost a word similar to like integration, sort of.
This is why you get the Passover meal, for example, in Judaism, and why you get the New Testament counterpart in Holy Communion. Yeah, because it's so important. People say, here sometimes, why do you do Holy Communion every week? Well, first of all, I think Jesus says to do that. I think he means that. I mean, he might not. He might mean do it more than every week, or once a year at Passover. But I think he means whenever the principal body gets together, whenever people assemble, they should do this. Certainly in Acts 2:42, the breaking of the bread is a normative part of the worship life of the church, just as praying and studying the apostles' teachings are. I think you need stuff to remind you. I find the reminder of Holy Communion so helpful to have bread and wine.
Yeah.
And being in the privileged position of presiding at communion, I sometimes get a pile of bread or a gulp of wine, and that is nice. I wish that we could still really drink from the chalice. It's really great to have a physical reminder of God's love. And
of our place in relation to him, that we partake of him. Mm-hmm. We're dependents.
Yeah.
Like we're not the leaders of this. And I think that's really the only way to maintain the kind of humility that's necessary. So to be, like Gordon Lord Byron said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that we see that in Gideon, and Jesus even acknowledges this, right? The rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them, but it shall not be so among you. So how do you be different? How do we not be, if God does call you into a place of power and authority, which isn't inherently bad,
right?
How do you navigate it? By realizing that you're nothing.
I think the Ephesians 5 principle of mutual submission that applies to marriage, is a helpful one. That we're to, a husband is to love the wife as Christ served the church, is really helpful, right? So it's a sacrificial headship. It's a sacrificial love. If you are in a position of influence and power, I think leading by letting go of your rights.
Yeah.
And putting the other person's interests above your own is the way to go. That is a thankless task. And actually what it says here is they did not show the steadfast love to the family of Gideon in return for all the good that he'd done to Israel. So it's kind of a nice way to end. We've been ragging on him a little bit. But the last sentence says that actually he did some good stuff and they didn't really show any loyalty to him for it. Which is another way in which this flawed character points to Jesus.
He's so human. I see so much of myself in Gideon and so much of the people who I know and love in his forgottenness, and also in his tendency to cave in on himself, to put himself in the place of authority, but also he's deeply conflicted. He's just deeply conflicted.
Yeah.
He has so many different sort of oppositional qualities. But that sort of is what it is to be human, to be a shattered image of God. So, but the good news of the gospel is that the Lord is in the process of taking broken people like that and putting us back together by the means of a very different kind of power. And the kind that brings the dead to life. There it is.
I just wonder at the moment of the general resurrection, when the dead are really raised to life, whether this is what the trumpet blast will sound like.
Probably better than this, even.
Even better.
Even better, if it's possible.
Los Yetis, if you could imagine such a thing.
I think the Lord can probably tear it up on a 6 string.
Yeah. Well, this has been a podcast of Christ Church, Fox Chapel. I'm very glad that you would listen. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you all very soon. God bless.
Stay classy.
And thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy.